Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. I'm Duncan Eaton, as some of you know. Been around a long time in healthcare, but here this afternoon in my role as chairman of the GS1 Healthcare Advisory Board. When I returned to this world of GS1 and everything that went with it almost 2.5 years ago when the advisory board was started, I was extremely pleasantly surprised to see the progress that had been made in the years when I hadn't been involved in it. And I would add my thanks to the efforts of the DH and especially Steve Graham, who'd got it to that stage at that time. One of the challenges that we were given at the first advisory board was that and it was from the senior NHS managers present. I can remember Ron Kerr, who was then Guys and Thomas chief executive, Ian Carruthers, and it was especially powerful from Ron, was that if GS1 was to make its presence felt, if it really was going to achieve something, then it had to prove to chief executives and those at the top table that it could help deliver some of their and the Trust's major objectives. And that was a challenge that was set for us and we took on board. And that's something that's underscored the deliberations of the group as it's met each quarter over the last 2.5 years. So how far have we got? Have we started to deliver that objective of engaging the top table? And to help answer that, we have a trial of chief executives. For those that don't understand prial, it means a hand of three and brag. I'm going back to my school days now of playing cards too much. And never in my long association in healthcare, as I said, would I have imagined that one day I'd be sat on a stage near Heathrow Airport talking with 3 chief executives about barcoding. And I think that in itself says a lot, and that's what we're going to explore over the next 45 minutes or so. So we have 3 chief executives who are listed in the programme. Cara, Charles Barks from Salisbury, Gavin Boyle from Derby, and Alan Foster from North Tees. And we'll learn more about them as we go through. I researched their backgrounds. I'm not going to sit here and give you their CVs, but 3 things struck me is that they come from totally different backgrounds, which says a lot about chief executives, general management now in the National Health Service. We have Cara, who is a nurse, including being a nurse originally, a manager in Australia, which is a perspective. Gavin, who's from general management, and Alan, originally from finance. The big problem I had with you, Gavin, is that as I research you, I see you've got roots in Merseyside.
That's right.
As an avid supporter of Manchester United, I struggle to sit here on the same stage as you, but we'll get over that. So that's the introduction. So I'm going to ask Cara if you could start. You're of the 3 people here. You're, I think, the most recent to GS1 and Scan for Safety. So why has it become a priority for you and your team at Salisbury?
So I joined Salisbury in February, so our Scan for Safety programme was well established when I joined, but in learning more about it, for me it just struck me as being barn door obvious, as why wouldn't we be doing this? And particularly for me, having a clinical background, the impact from a patient safety perspective was so apparent. So in speaking with the team, particularly being able to track our patients, track devices in particular, and the work that we've been doing particularly with our theatres and our cardiology teams, And I think the most powerful message for me was when they described, and you would have seen this today in the other presentations, about the horse meat scandal and the fact that supermarkets can in fact pull products from shelves in a matter of minutes, yet here we are so many years after having implants for breast cancer and breast reconstruction and still not being able to trace women's implants, and the safety impacts of that just means that something like this is so obvious. And I think the other thing from my perspective was that there's so much discussion around clinical variation. So we know we have so much variation in clinical practices between our clinicians, between the products they use, the way that they do things. And what I've really seen since I started at Salisbury is really different conversations happening between the clinical teams. So using the data that they're getting through the Scan for Safety program to start challenging one another, start discussing the products that they're using, and collectively identify a consistent approach that they then want to take forward. I can talk a little bit later about some of the financial impact that we've seen, but certainly the things from my perspective that we saw from a patient safety improvement perspective, the discussions that it created around variation in practice and the ability for us to do things differently, as well as the recurrent financial benefits, made it seem like a really obvious thing for me to be championing.
Thanks, Cara. We will come back to some of the things you've already mentioned. Gavin, Derby, probably has been the forerunner of Scan for Safety. So why does it still remain a priority for you at Derby?
I think for me, I joined Derby Teaching Hospitals probably about a couple of years ago, so they'd already started their GS1 Scan for Safety journey. I can remember when Kevin Downs, who's with us today, who's been a real ambassador for this programme, first started talking to me about, we're doing something really interesting with barcoding. I can remember saying, that's really, really interesting. Anyway, sort of thinking, well, what is this all about? But when you start to get senior clinical leaders within an organisation, like Bod Goddard, who you heard from earlier, and Keith Jones, our clinical director for surgery, will be speaking tomorrow, then that really gets your attention, because something that's exciting clinicians, and it might sound quite prosaic, but actually you start to realise that other people are seeing a benefit here that perhaps might not be obvious at first glance. So I suppose for my part, a bit like Cara, really, it's a no-brainer. As the leader of an NHS organisation, we're grappling with that triple challenge of how do you redesign services to improve quality, to become more efficient, and live within our financial means. And it seems to me that this technology is a real enabler to that. So whether it's about data that helps us to use evidence to redesign our services, to streamline what we're doing, whether it's about issues like traceability, but also helping us to pick up variation in clinical practice, that we might want to have deeper conversations about what does that mean for patient quality, but also sort of the more obvious things like procurement and stock management and those sorts of things. It seems to me that GS1 and Scan for Safety really speaks to that triple challenge. So for me, as a chief executive of an organisation, it really is a no-brainer.
Yeah, I'll come back to this being a no-brainer, because a lot of places here would like to do it, where the top team aren't seeing it as a no-brainer. So I'll come back and give you a warning in terms of some clues about how they develop it and sell it to teams. So, Alan, I think you are a seasoned, long-standing champion for GS1. So, again, why?
I'm Alan Foster. I'm the Chief Executive of North Tees and Hartlepool. Mustn't forget Hartlepool.
Oh, sorry.
Foundation Trust. I'm also leading the sustainability and transformation planning across the northeastern Cumbria. We're trying to I've been asked to bring 3 STPs together, so I'll maybe say more about that later in terms of the opportunities that I think that will bring. But I've been passionate about this for a long time, and thought we should have introduced it many years ago. But as I think the other speakers have said, this is about patient safety, and I became chief executive of the trust I'm in 10 years ago, so I've managed to survive 10 years. Must be getting something right in these difficult times. But for me, at every board meeting, and when we looked at our strategy 10 years ago, and we've refreshed it ever since, the strapline really is putting patients first. And it's okay saying that, but you've got to mean it, you've got to live it and breathe it every single day. And for me, what we're doing here with GS1 is exactly that. It's about putting patients first in terms of the safety of the care that we can provide for patients. It's about ensuring that traceability. It's about productivity as well, that we get more for our money out of the NHS in terms of clinical performance. We can track all of that. And the efficiency that we talk about, we need that so that we can open up new opportunities to do more things in the NHS. We do need to transform the NHS, and I see this helping to transform the way that we do things, which will be safer for patients and also freeing up some resource so that we can provide better care. Maybe again I can say more about that later. But it's absolutely at the front of what we need to do, and that's why I'm involved in this, and we've got to find a way of sustaining it, and you'd expect me to say that, leading a sustainability and transformation plan, but also make sure it is rolled out right across the NHS. My final point being, the NHS over the years in my time has had many pilots. We've had many pilot schemes for lots of things. Often we've never managed to roll them out and make a success of them. This time I feel we're on the threshold of doing just that, and we've got 6 foundation trusts involved in this particular project, and by working together I think we can, with our partners, we can make a success of this. So that's what I passionately believe in, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah, thanks. We'll move on fairly shortly to talking about the future and how we move it forward. But can you put a bit more flesh on some of the real achievements? You mentioned the broad headings. Are there any real numbers or examples you can give where it has really delivered benefit?
I mean, for us, we've saved about 4,000 nursing hours in terms of freeing up nurses, and it's not about getting cash out, although I've got a deficit for the first time in 25 years this year. It's not something I'm proud of, and it's something that we're trying to deal with. But essentially, what this has allowed us to do is free up nursing time, but we're able to put that back into helping on the front line. So it's about improving the quality of care. And those nursing hours mean that we are spending less on bank in relation to nursing. We're able to fill more shifts. We're able to use that resource more flexibly by moving staff around the hospital. So I'm reinvesting that nursing time, and that's providing better quality. That's ensured our preparations for winter are stronger than they would have otherwise been, because like many in the room that are working in trusts, we have got a shortage of nurses in our trust. Trying to go overseas has been one solution in the past, but it's not the only answer. So one of the concrete things for me is freeing up that nursing time to put back into front line, and in the future I'm convinced we will be able to take some cash out as well. But there's lots of other productivity improvements that we've made, reducing stock levels, reducing wastage, and making sure that we can run as tight as possible when it comes to procurement, the buying of products. But as I say, the real tenet of this is about the safety aspects of the project.
I was going to say, I mean, you asked about how do you start to talk to executive teams around the importance of this, and Gavin's right in the fact that we're constantly juggling as a board that balance between how do you deliver services productively, how do you make sure you're delivering them as efficiently and as lower cost as possible, and as well as that patient safety aspect. And it's a constant tension, and I think the Scan for Safety programme does enable a mechanism to start to tackle some of that. So I know for a fact from deliverables in my own organisation from a financial perspective. So when we first rolled out the programme in orthopaedics, we identified that 8% of our stock on the shelves had either expired or was about to expire in 2 weeks. So the reality is that that enabled us to manage our stock much more effectively and reduce that wastage there. And in the first 18 months of the programme, we've delivered over £1 million in savings. 300,000 of that is non-recurrent, but over 800,000 of that is recurrent, and that relates to better stock control, better use of things, working with clinicians around the sets that they use in theatres and reducing the amount of equipment that they have on set so that it's right for them. So it's absolutely around understanding your business at micro level, working with the teams that are using those products that absolutely enable them to have the right product when they want it, to then deliver care as they need to as well. And all of that releases time, which is a soft impact, but then that's some of the hard impacts we've seen as well.
It's interesting. I mean, just to sort of echo some of those comments, I did a bit of a walk around last week with James Main, our project manager for this programme. And one of the things I was really keen to do is to talk to frontline staff about their experience of using the technology and scanning and barcoding. And one of the things I suppose I was concerned about was the sort of cultural aspects, and would people feel it's a bit Big Brother or a bit strange to think about patients in that way. But exactly as you say, I mean, one of the striking things is talking to, I mean, I was in our cath labs, for example, and talking to the staff there, and they'd really embraced the technology. And it is this issue about, you know, it saves time. It allows senior clinical people to spend time with patients rather than checking stock, but actually they can do that more effectively. But there are some hard benefits, I think, for us. So in terms of the finances, so I think last year we had savings of something like 1.2 million, and that was reduced spend. It wasn't just taking stock off the shelves, but you know, we did make some savings there as well. And I think for the coming year, we're probably forecasting something in excess of 2 million in terms of savings. But I think what really excites me, though, as we begin to roll it out, we've got it in all our theatres now, endoscopy, the cath labs, starting to look at our wards and how might this enable our red to green approach and reducing delays in hospital. But that's what really excites me. It's the clinical applications, and although, you know, I'm really proud of the progress that's been made in Derby, but it feels like we're just at the beginning of something. It feels like what we've done is we've identified all the notes, but now it's time to start writing some interesting songs and doing something really, really special with it. So I feel like we're at the beginning. Yeah.
Well, again, we'll come back and talk to, well, what next and whatever. But you've obviously, in each case, you've got staff on board. And I doubt whether that was easy to sell this into the organisation. Am I right? In the early days, I mean. Yeah.
Well, maybe if I can answer that, you certainly need clinical champions to to spread the word and be passionate about this. The clinicians get it when they see what the opportunities and what the possibilities are. In my trust, we put an orthopaedic surgeon in charge of the project in terms of the clinical leadership of this. And for me, it was linking that up with the work that's going on currently on getting it right first time for patients. And one of our first reports we got was around orthopaedic surgery. And we have lots of clinical variation in orthopaedic surgery. And we did have a good visit from the lead. I can't quite remember his name now, but he came. We had all of the orthopaedic surgeons there. And as you will probably know, if you're from a trust, they can be an awkward bunch. They've always got strong opinions, and more often than not, their practice is best practice. But the getting it right first time bit really opened up some interesting topics of debate. But what we're doing here is absolutely aligned with getting it right first time, because that's what scanning for safety is about. Making sure that we don't put the wrong thing into the wrong patient, make sure that we're getting medication errors hopefully eliminated that we still see from time to time in the hospital. And so it was very powerful and the right thing to do for me to have an orthopaedic surgeon championing that. Since then, we've got all of our clinical directors on board right across the Foundation Trust, and we need to spread it out into the community parts of our service as well. But you do need those clinical champions. But it's once you get into that in a meaningful way for clinicians, where they can see the patient benefit and the benefit for themselves, you know, that is the major, for me, the major thing that you need to achieve to get the organisation on board.
Cara, yours has been, I think, a nurse-led initiative with Lorna, who I think is out there. So, as I think you hinted at it, nurses are on board to this as well.
Yeah, and I think Lorna's been such a fantastic champion in our organisation for this, and having nurses on board and seeing the impact for nursing, and again in that releasing time to care is so crucial. So we're really excited about the new things that we're looking at taking forward. For example, one of the projects that we're taking forward is around medical equipment and being able to scan and locate medical equipment. So a piece of work that we did in the organisation was that we interviewed our nursing staff, and we identified that 50% of them on any given day spend time finding equipment. So any of you that have ever worked in an area and tried to find a piece of equipment can absolutely understand the impact and time lost with something like that. So one of our next steps, of course, is rolling out to how we use Scan for Safety for equipment, because just imagine the impact for staff in all areas, be it nursing, allied health professionals, porters, etc. If they know exactly where the piece of equipment is that they want, they know where it's located, and it takes them less than a couple of minutes to locate it and take it back to the clinical area. The impact of that from a time-saving perspective across the organisation is absolutely massive. The other piece of work that we're also doing is building on what was historically around productive ward, because we've also tracked, we're trialling with one of our wards, but over a day we tracked 30 different departments or areas visiting that ward area, dropping stock, leaving things in the ward area for the nursing staff to then put away. So in being able to identify what happens in those ward areas absolutely lets us work with the ward to come up with time-saving processes and things that then releases again that time back from nursing staff back into patients. So getting nurses involved in the practical things that happen to them on a daily basis and how we might do it differently, and also how they might work with support services to run their wards better for patients has been quite crucial for us.
Great. Gavin, I think doctors have been the leaders in your test, and Cara's quite neatly started to talk about, well, what next? So I'm interested to know where it rolls forward in Derby next, particularly with the on the medical side.
So I think that the general point about having champions for this within the organisation, and particularly clinical leaders getting involved, I think is fundamental. I think it's interesting, but I think, you know, when I think about the different senior clinicians who are involved, they're coming at it in different ways. And one of the things that's really exciting about this is there is a myriad of applications, and I think part of the challenge will be focusing our efforts on those things that we think will deliver the biggest benefit to patients and to the organisation. So, I mean, we heard from Bod Goddard this morning about its application in terms of patient safety and clinical audit. But when you talk to some of our surgical colleagues like Keith, it's particularly around, you know, how you use that information to organise your theatre lists better. But I guess in terms of looking forward, you know, where do I see some of the real opportunities? Well, within the hospital, there's clearly the opportunity to continue the work that we're doing. So we're currently just supporting one ward at the moment. So we focused on theatres and sort of procedure based departments, but I'm really keen on that rollout in the ward areas. I think outpatients particularly. I think the comments this morning about the sort of LS Lowry painting and all of that, I think struck home. So there's a real opportunity to use this technology to think about how we redesign those services. But one of the particular challenges for my organisation is we're currently in a partnership with a neighbouring trust, Burton Hospitals, and our aim is to become one organisation in the spring, so by sort of April time. And the real prize of coming together as a single organisation is the opportunity to develop integrated clinical services covering that much wider population. And I can see that this technology will be absolutely critical in understanding patients' journey along those integrated clinical pathways.
Come back to some of that. And Alan, incidentally, when I said it was clinical led in Derby, I'm not underestimating Kevin Downs on the finance side. I know he's out there, and I
was scowling actually.
I know. It suddenly occurred to me that it was in the interest of developing the questions, not to upset you, Kevin, but I'll buy you a drink later. It was interesting, Alan, your person on the Healthcare Advisory Group and other groups was in fact a non-executive of the Trust.
Yes.
Brian, Deputy Chairman. And he was immediately a passionate advocate of it. Was there anything there about engaging the wider...
Yes, Brian Dinsdale's our Deputy Chairman of the Trust, and well, he has a finance background as it happens.
Right.
He worked in local government, and he'd been involved in procurement projects in local government, and this is obviously a great deal more than that. But he could see the financial potential of doing all of this, as well as the safety aspects that we've talked about. As I say, at every board meeting we talk about in the context of whatever the discussion is, whatever the report is that is before us, making sure that patient focus, that putting patient first isn't lost in terms of making the right decisions going forward. So, not that we needed much selling, but at the board meeting when we decided to sign up for this and move it forward, Brian was certainly a big help in that, and we felt with his enthusiasm it would be great to get him linked into the project. And I know he's been working with our team locally, as well as working with Department of Health, GS1 and others in terms of shaping this as it's moved forward, and that has been extremely helpful. I think it's fair to say this helps to change the whole culture in terms of the safety agenda, and certainly I would encourage others that take on the projects to get their non-executive directors involved as appropriate. I mean, clearly it is appropriate only. Clearly, they're not clinical experts, but support for the team really means a lot. And when we do our ward-to-board stuff, or board-to-ward, I should say, in terms of walking around the hospital, and we have visits to the wards by board members. They can speak, obviously, with some knowledge and authority about the projects that we're asking staff to implement. And there's a big link with what we're doing here with our IT and digital strategy in the hospital as well. So it certainly helped us to move the project forward.
Yeah. The national team, I know, are hoping before too long the decision will be made on money to roll out this programme. But before then, are there any things that a trust could do that it shouldn't wait for money for, that we've learnt from this programme? In fact, Derby, I think, embarked on it before then they got the national monies, because one of the things we're keen to do is to roll this forward, not just wait to become a demonstrator site in the next round. I think
that's right. I mean, clearly we've benefited from resources being a national demonstrator. So, I mean, that's been extremely helpful. So there's no denying that. But that's come to an end. Yep. So you'll be pleased to know that we're not stopping here. And the reason why we're carrying on is that I think there's something about mainstreaming this into our general transformation program now, because I think we've had the benefit of a bit of a kickstart, but we can see the benefits and the impact and the potential the savings and the benefit. I think I think what will happen going forward is we will look at each proposal to apply the technology on a case-by-case basis and look at what the ROI is for each proposal. But we just see this as being just part of the day-to-day business now, and let's embed it in the work of the hospital. I think one of the things I'm particularly keen to do, though, is to think beyond the walls of the trust now, and to think through how do we start to engage wider system partners, particularly in relation to the SDPs and kind of that whole sort of the sort of systems dynamic.
Can we move on to that, because that was going, if we break out from the individual trust doing something, is how does it help deliver the organisational change, changing patient pathways, you say, STPs, accountable care organisations, goodness knows how many other things. And it was a theme that came from Matthew Swindle's this morning, that if this is really going to move forward, it needs to demonstrate a wider delivery and engage with other things that are going on. So can we develop that in terms of, it may be trust mergers, it may be into the community? Because I think you've probably all got examples where you want to do something, or things are already happening. I think you have it.
I mean, I was going to say one of the key things that we've now moved on to is using Scan for Safety to support patient flow and patient information, because, of course, being able to track our patients enables us to see who they're interacting with, where their touch points are. And as Gavin has said, we all know that we need to work in a much more integrated way to deliver patient care in the future, and that's got to be strong alignment and integration, not only between acute hospitals but the community, social care, primary care. So the impact of being able to track our patients through those different care providers and those different points of care, and start to look at where there's duplication, what are the interventions that we're doing, what are we spending on those individual patients, and using the data that we gain from those different patient stories, for want of a better word, to start to redesign those pathways is incredibly powerful. That's how we'll make a massive difference to how we care for patients in the future across the whole NHS.
I'm just wondering about the decision-making process in terms of identifying future demonstrators and what support might be. I mean, a really interesting approach might be to look at demonstrators that would enable that system approach. So where you could actually connect not just hospitals or acute providers, but with the wider community. So whether that's primary care or even in the care environments as well. So I think it'd be really interesting to see if we could develop on what's happened before, but to see if we can do something slightly different.
A personal view, it'll succeed more and the money will become more easily available if that is demonstrated. Talking to Matthew Swindles earlier and listening to him, and he's got some influence on this. I've no doubt that's a key issue.
I mean, maybe if I can just add, the STP brand, it isn't everybody's cup of tea in terms of where we've got to with some of that. And as you say, they're talking about accountable care systems and whatever, and they talk about it interchangeably, and potentially it means slightly different things to different people. But for me...
Alan, sorry to interrupt. Can you develop what you mean by an STP? It may be not all the audience here may have heard of it, necessarily know exactly what you mean in terms of what you're doing there.
Well, it's the development of to begin with anyway, the development of a sustainability and transformation plan for an area. There was 44 designated in the country. It's now morphed into sustainability and transformation partnerships, which I think is better. In terms of the only way this will work, the only way we can realise some of these benefits is if we work in partnership. For me, it's about developing a strategic plan together with partners, and that's mental health, community, local authorities, as well as the acute sector, to look at the big picture and develop big data, which has been touched upon. But where I see my role going forward is, and the benefits that we can get from this, it's about clinicians networking across groups of hospitals. It's the complex pathways we've got, which Gavin has touched on, where we move patients rightly from one hospital to another when we need to escalate their care or they need to go and see experts. And if we can track and trace everything that's happening to them across that pathway, that will be enormously powerful as well as safer for them. And we can learn a lot from that and remove duplication, so on and so forth, which we currently have in the system. But money is really tight. I think I said earlier, for the first time in my time in the NHS, we'll probably have a deficit. Hope the regulators are not in the room. But essentially, the STP gives us an opportunity to change the way that we do things. And it is about getting money out of the system that doesn't add any value. And I think we all know with the current system that we work within, there is too much duplication. We have got commissioners doing things that could be done in a more streamlined way. We could have foundation trusts that could collaborate a bit more than they have been, and therefore put that money back into the front line. But for me, it's about helping to resource this as a work stream going forward in the STP, because I do recognise if there's some money, because the transformation bit in sustainability and transformation partnerships, to me, has been overlooked. We've got sustainability funding, but it's propping up the bottom line. We haven't really had real transformational funding. In the Northeast, where I'm from, we've had some success with some of the digital funding. We've got some digital trusts that are what is known as digital exemplars, and we're trying to develop a Great North Care record so that all frontline clinicians can have access to the summary care record of individuals, whether it's in the back of an ambulance, in a GP practice, or coming in through urgent care or A&E. And that will be powerful in itself. But I see the STP providing we can get true collaboration, an opportunity to create the right environment for this, and also to create some funding that we together can put into rolling this out across the footprint. I do agree with what's been said. You can make the case without asking for pump prime funding, but clearly we can go much quicker, and we can unblock some of the bottlenecks if we have a little bit of transformation funding. And that's what I want to try to create, a transformation fund to actually do some of this across the patient pathways.
As it rolls forward, however it's done, a critical thing for me will be the availability of the skills to manage and implement the programme. And I don't think I'd underestimate that if there's suddenly 25 demonstrator sites, finding that it's not my, won't be my responsibility, but finding the people to do that. Will your trusts be prepared to help, or will you just go back into yourselves and say, we'll continue to do what we've been doing? Are you prepared to help the wider cause?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There are often no new ideas. We often spend lots of time trying to create the new ideas, and the reality is somebody has probably already done that and learnt from that and learnt how to do it. And so we absolutely have an obligation, I think, to share what we've learned and support others, fast-tracking and things that might have taken us 18 months, they can certainly do in a much shorter time. And at the end of the day, we are all part of one big NHS family, really. And at the end of the day, we're all here for the same reason. So if we've identified opportunities that can be shared widely and applied everywhere else, we should absolutely be sharing those, and we will be.
Okay. I'm sure that will be...
yeah, absolutely.
That will be welcome. Never events. Have you seen any never events in your trusts, without giving away the detail, that you think if you've been farther down the line with GS1, they may have been prevented?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I thought, I mean, Terence Stevenson's presentation this morning was, really inspiring. And the one takeaway statistic that stuck in my mind is, something like I think it was 79% of never events could be attributable to what could be called checking errors, wrong side surgery, wrong implant. And I think certainly something, clearly we're really keen to develop at Derby is building in, as part of the stop moment, kind of just using the GS1 technology to absolutely make that a much more rigorous process. So, I mean, one of the examples, or one of the things we need to do is to, because it's all about, you know, we can identify the right patient, we can check that we've got the right procedure and the right product, but it's also kind of what was the prescription. So what is it in the care record? You know, is it left side? Is it right side? What are the measurements if it's an implantable lens? And getting all of those bits of information to join up, I think is a key part of the next step. I mean, in terms of my kind of ambition for, you know, if we were going to look 5 years down the line, I mean, I'd like to be able to say that my organisation was a trust where there was no harm caused to patients as a result of a flawed checking process. And the reason we've achieved that is because we're using this technology to help protect our patients better.
I mean, certainly I've seen never events that could have been avoided or would have been avoided had we had this in place. That's absolutely the case, and not just in my own trust, but many others talking to colleagues elsewhere. I was lucky enough to go to Japan many years ago, and also to the United States, to Virginia Mason, the medical center over there, with their system in terms of looking at the way they do things. But in Japan, it was to look at the Toyota production system. Efficient operation, but the thing that impressed me about what they were doing, it was about stop the line. And that was not using technology as such, but it was encouraging staff on the line to shout up and be accountable, to stop the line if they saw anything, any defect or default or something that was going to happen to the production line. And I thought, well, how powerful would that be if we brought that into the health environment? And that's really what the World Health Organization checklist is about. If as Gavin has said, building on that, encouraging people to speak up and stop the line if they see some harm that's coming. But the best thing to avoid human error or whatever is to try to use technology to actually put that in place. And it just seems to me, if we're barcoding and scanning the location, the patient, the member of staff ultimately, can be barcoded so we know who's doing what procedure. It makes people more accountable. There's no hiding place in the sense of being able to trace everything that happens, and to encourage that, because we encourage reporting now, but sometimes it doesn't happen maybe as transparently as it should. And I see this as a way of actually bringing that to the fore, encouraging, you know, a much safer approach all round for patients. And then the traceability bit, we talked about PIP implants earlier. We were involved in the metal-on-metal issues with prostheses, hip prostheses. And the amount of time and effort it took my staff in the trust to actually go through records to determine which prosthesis went into which patient and when and all the rest of it, and to recall all of those patients. Had we had this system in place, it would have saved a lot of time and money, but more importantly, we could have reassured the patients much sooner, because patients were ringing up the hotline saying, is it me? Have I got one of these? You know, and that reassurance could have been given much, much more quickly. And so there's enormous benefits to this going forward.
I mean, I would agree with that. I think one of the most powerful stories that I heard when I first joined the organisation was around one of our clinicians who hadn't bought into the process in operating theatres and was really giving the team such a hard time about the fact that they were delaying him because they were insisting on scanning, and he was hurrying them up. And he's now our biggest champion, because on that particular day, as they scanned a product, we found that he had expired stock ready to go, and he was going to operate with that. And so he was a massive convert. But, you know, coming back to that thing about how do we use technology to absolutely drive the practice that we're doing and support humans who are only doing what humans can do, but use our technology to make things safer.
I mean, the opportunities are kind of, you know, immense, really. I mean, one of our consultant anaesthetists, Nick Reynolds, has been developing a kind of prototype in ITU around an infusion device. I think we're going to say a little bit about this tomorrow, but in essence, it's about how can you build in a barcode reader. I mean, incorrectly programmed infusion pumps are one of the major sources of medication errors within hospitals. So how do you build in a scanner into a pump that will check you've got the right patient? you've got the right drug, but also can check the prescribing system to identify that you've got the right dose, and then that pump won't work unless all three things tie up. So it's a really simple example of how you use that technology to take out the kind of the human error as part of that process.
Go back to an earlier point as we're coming to the end. Say there are people here who want to do it, having difficulty getting their trust board engaged. They're probably fighting to see the chief executive. One or two points that you would give to them to say, knock on your chief executive's door, this is why we need to start looking at scan for safety. I know we're summarising, but if you could pick one or two things that you would pick as your top priorities to get this programme educated and implemented elsewhere.
I think for me, I mean, that issue of clinical leadership is really key. I think the risk, and rather like my initial reaction when Kevin raised it with me, I think people think it's about procurement, and it it might be, and clearly there are benefits there, undoubtedly, but actually it's when your imagination clicks in and you start to think about actually when you know the place, the product, the patient, the people, all of that information, it's the tunes you can play on that. And the things that you can do with that technology, and particularly hearing it from clinical leaders, because they've got it, they can see what the benefits are. I think for me, it's if you can communicate that side of this, I think that's what really captures the imagination and fires up the programme.
The other thing that I was going to say is that, it is absolutely about shifting it away from a procurement and finance initiative and making it very much around a patient safety quality initiative. Get in and talk to your directors of nursing and your medical directors. They will see time and time again through their quality data opportunities where Scan for Safety can have an impact. And so working with your clinicians and your clinical teams, if you've got never events, as we've identified, using it as an opportunity to say, well, this is what we could have done differently. But absolutely, I would drive it through a patient safety route.
Okay. Do chief executives still meet each other? Do you still have fora where you sit down as chief executives?
I mean, certainly in the East Midlands, we've got a long-running chief execs forum. So that is quite active. So actually, that's been a really good place for looking at other innovations and kind of getting buy-in across the system. So I think having those kind of forums is really helpful.
What I was going to say is, can we look to you to help in these forums to try and give a bit of plug for what we're talking about if it's not already on the agenda? Because I think peer-to-peer pressure information can be powerful, can't it?
I mean, we've already helped our neighbouring trust to put a business case together for their boards to move this project forward. And again, using the Sustainability and Transformation Partnership, we're bringing all of the chief officers together. Previously, chief executives of Foundation Trust met, and the accountable officers of the CCGs were meeting, but we didn't meet together.
Yep.
So one of the things I've done is bring us all back in the same room to talk about all the issues and the wider perspectives, because this has such, great opportunities to be rolled out into primary care and into community care, yep, and into care homes. And we're trying to support care homes. The social care sector is really vulnerable, as we all know, and they need help and support. And if we can help them deliver this, that will be, a major step forward as well in true collaboration right across the health and care sector.
That's been marvellous. I think we brought out all the key things that I'd hope we would, and a lot more. So finally, thank what's going on in your trust and the people that do it, that enable you and have prompted you to sit here today. But thanks particularly for you in what I suspect is a fairly busy agenda that you've got, to give up your time to so passionately, and that does come over, support Scan for Safety and GS1. And we don't underestimate that. We thank you. We thank you for it. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please thank our panel?